Can I welcome members, invited guests and the public, both here and watching on the webcast, to today's meeting of the Economy Committee. Today's meeting will be meeting topic will be the Mayor of London's draft culture strategy. We encourage anyone to take part in the discussion on social media using the hashtag #AssemblyEconomy. And first, we've got a few short items of formal business to go through before we get to our guests. Have we received any apologies?
Thank you. We've received apologies for absence from Assembly Member Dismore, for whom Assembly Member Coghill will be substituting, Assembly Member Hall, for whom Assembly Member Devenish will be substituting, and apologies for absence from Assembly Member Arnold.
Thank you. And can we note the list of appointments set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare?
Noted.
Thank you. And can we agree the minutes from our last meeting held on the 20th of February 2018?
Agreed.
Thank you. And can we note the outstanding list of actions?
Noted.
Thank you. So that brings us to today's main discussion item on the Mayor's draft culture strategy for London. And so I'm now going to welcome our guests. We have Jenny Waldman, CBE, Director of 1418 Now. We have Sharon Ament, Director of the Museum of London. We have Ben Evans, who is the Chair of the Cultural Leadership Board. We have Justine Simons, OBE, who is Deputy Mayor for Culture and the Creative Industries. We have Shonagh Manson, who is Assistant Director for Culture and Creative Industries, and we have Councillor Clare Coghill, who is Leader of the Council for London Borough of Waltham Forest, which is now the Borough of Culture. Can I welcome you all? Thank you so much for coming to talk with us this morning. Now, I'm going to start off with a question mainly for Justine. Just a sort of very general question, which is just asking you to outline the Mayor's vision for culture in London, and also how will this draft strategy help him to achieve it, and how would we judge its success?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and many thanks, Caroline and the committee, for inviting me here to talk to you about the Mayor's draft culture strategy, entitled A Culture for All Londoners. We really welcome today's session, which is kicking off the consultation period, and I really hope that the discussions today will contribute to and inform the final strategy. What I'd like to do is say a few words about culture, to set some context and to look at why it's an increasing priority for cities all over the world, and then talk about the strategy, our vision and how we will achieve it. So Sadiq has made culture and creative industries one of his top priorities. He's the first London Mayor to do this. And cities all around the world are also waking up to the power of culture. I chair the World Cities Culture Forum, and every year 35 global cities get together to look at how culture can be embedded into urban policy. And what has become clear to this group of cities is that culture in cities is no longer a nice to have. It's gone from niche to mainstream. Why is this? I put it down to 5 reasons. Firstly, in an increasingly globalised world, culture gives cities their own distinctive identity, brand, if you will. When global competition is fierce, cities need to stand out. They need a USP and they need an edge, and culture can help with this. London has been defined through the decades by creative tribes, whether that was Mary Quant's miniskirt revolution, reactionary punks in the 70s, or grime music making waves today on the world stage. London Fashion Week, the Design Festival, award-winning theatre, the Brits and the BAFTAs, they all do an incredible job at showcasing our success as a capital city. Given the uncertainties over Brexit, it is essential that London retains its competitive edge. We need to invest in the things that make this city a success. And our success is in great part due to sustained investment in the creative industries. Film London, the film agency for London, has built partnerships and promoted London as a result. London is now the 3rd biggest capital for film, after Los Angeles and New York. 40 films are shot on the streets of London every week, every day. And Film London now attracts over £1 billion of inward investment into film and high-end TV every year. The same is true for fashion. London is now one of the top 4 fashion capitals, along with Paris, Milan and New York. London Fashion Week puts the capital onto the global map and lures overseas buyers. And this means that London fashion businesses, the majority of which are small to medium enterprises, make 100 million in new sales at London Fashion Week every year. Our culture and creative industries are often our international calling card. If we look at how artists and creatives have helped us with the London is Open campaign, the now iconic David Shrigley posters telling people that London welcomes you, but also our theatre, dance and film industries have all got behind the London is Open campaign. So global reputation is important. London's reputation for quality, creativity and talent attracts investment and positions London as a leading international city. Which brings me to my second point. Culture generates money and jobs for cities. In London, the creative industries bring in 47 billion a year. 1 in 6 jobs are in the creative economy. And jobs in the creative economy are growing 4 times faster than the economy at large. Throughout this period of austerity, culture and the creative industries have kept on growing. The creative economy has helped London to weather the storm. Looking at the national picture, the creative industries are worth almost 92 billion to the UK economy. And as we say in the strategy, the creative economy is larger than the automotive, life sciences, aerospace, oil and gas industries combined. And there are a huge range of jobs, including the supply chains that are also supported by the creative industries. We mention some of these in the strategy when we talk about jobs. When we talk about investing in culture, the beneficiaries are not just creative people. We're talking about a huge range of jobs and supply chains that support the creative process. To give you an example, the producer of the Bond films, Barbara Broccoli, told me that every time she makes a Bond film, she needs 1,000 carpenters. There are also caterers, drivers, electricians, accountants, all manner of jobs behind the scenes. And as for the creative jobs, they are the jobs of the future because 87% of creative jobs won't be automated. And why is that? Because, as I often say, you can't automate the imagination. The third reason for supporting culture is because it's a major driver for tourists. Research from London and Partners tells us that 4 out of 5 people say the main reason they come to London is culture, and that's both visitors and those coming to live and work here. London is the most visited city on the planet. 31.2 million visitors came last year, and 4 out of 5 of them coming for culture is therefore a big deal. Cultural tourists spend 7.3 billion a year in London. And increasingly, tourists are demanding a more authentic experience. They want to live life as a Londoner. And we must respond to this demand, particularly if we are going to appeal to second and third time visitors who now want something different. Visitors are not just staying in Zone 1, but further afield and in outer London. So we need to get smarter about the visitor offer across the city, not just in the centre. Tourists are increasingly looking to social media when deciding where to go on holiday. What people say about London and how they rate this city's offer on sites like TripAdvisor is increasingly how they are making a decision on whether to visit London. The reputation of our cultural offer is therefore crucial. So to reiterate the point I made a moment ago, with Brexit looming, we must invest in our cultural offer. We need to remain ahead of the game. We need to build on our successes. We must remain innovative and competitive. But culture in cities is about more than these impressive economic figures and tourism potential. Reason number 4, regeneration and placemaking. Creatives are often described as the shock troops of regeneration, moving into unloved cheap spaces and breathing life into run-down areas of town. We've seen this cycle repeat itself all over London, from Camden Town to Upper Street in Islington and more recently places like Shoreditch and Peckham. In the 1950s, the Royal Festival Hall kick-started major development along the South Bank. In the 1990s, the Tate Modern did the same for Bankside. This is why we're planning a major new cultural quarter for the Olympic Park. The V&A, the Smithsonian, Sadler's Wells, London College of Fashion and UCL will move in to create a new world-class destination for London. It's a brilliant legacy for 2012. It will create new jobs and contribute to the regeneration of East London. And it will benefit Londoners and visitors for generations to come. We're also preparing a cultural vision for the Royal Docks in the East. English National Ballet and the London Film School have already announced plans to move to a new home there. This part of London, from Stratford to the estuary, has also been identified as having 22 billion of development potential, and our vision is for culture to be at the heart of this. The Mayor has a bold vision for the Thames estuary. We want to build a new generation of large production centres along the Thames estuary. We call it the Thames Estuary Production Corridor. This will include the largest film studio in London built in the last 25 years. It will be in Dagenham East, and the operator was announced last week, Pacifica Ventures. It's a major studio behind Breaking Bad and The Avengers. This is fantastic news for London and for Dagenham, and we want this to be the first of many creative centres along the Thames estuary. And our focus is not just on the east of London. We're embedding culture in plans for Old Oak and the Park Royal. We want to develop a cultural quarter in part of this city. Reason number 5. Finally, at a deeper level, culture offers us something more profound. In our digital world, where our lives are increasingly run by algorithms, we spend hours distracted by the so-called attention economy of social media. We have a gig economy where many people work for apps these days. Culture offers us something different. It offers us a human connection. Sitting in a theatre with your phone switched off, following the same emotional journey of the play as 500 other people, is a rare and beautiful thing these days. Sadiq and I went to Hull a few months ago to see how the City of Culture had an impact there. We went to learn from their experiences, and as we were preparing for our own London Borough of Culture Award, and we were honestly completely blown away by how it had transformed the city of Hull. Aside from the actual art events, it had been a catalyst for major city pedestrianisation, including gorgeous fountains and public squares. The first 4-star hotel was being built, independent shops had sprung up, and businesses were finding it easier to recruit people. The renewed civic pride in Hull was palpable, from the volunteers we met at the station to the community workers on estates. 90% of the population had been to something in the programme in the first 3 months. The response to our own London Borough of Culture Award has been pretty incredible too. 22 boroughs put in bids, and the competition was very fierce. 15,000 people pledged their support for Waltham Forest's bid. We hear from Brent that none of the young people they consulted had ever been to the Tate and never heard of the National Gallery. We found out that Merton wants a new cinema. We found out that Kingston will celebrate their diverse musical heritage, that Lambeth will work with young BMAE leaders to develop their arts careers, that Looked After Children embarking in Dagenham will devise a creative programme, that older people in Lewisham will design an arts programme called the Festival of Creative Ageing, and that 12 housing estates in Camden will host cultural celebrations. Through the London Borough Culture Programme, all these projects are now coming to life. All over the city, culture will help improve the lives of thousands of Londoners. Culture will help forge new relationships and friendships. Culture will help with social integration and fighting off isolation. Culture will bring Londoners together. And so, to recap, why Sadiq has made culture a top priority. It's because culture helps us beat off the global competition, it brings in millions of tourists, it creates jobs and money, it brings communities together, it breathes life into rundown parts of town, and it builds a human connection in an increasingly disconnected world. And all of this adds up to a significant contribution to cities, and this is a trend we see all around the world. Global cities are realising that if they want to be successful in the 21st century, they can't do it without culture. Cities like Barcelona, Kyoto and Berlin have used culture to put themselves on the map. And many other cities are cultural staples, places like New York, Amsterdam, Shanghai, Paris and Tokyo. It used to be the case that culture was at the bottom of the list, vulnerable when belts tighten. And there are still many pressures. But today, businesses and policymakers have grasped the potential of culture to help deliver positive, good growth and change in almost any context, with depth and sophistication. Culture is being hardwired into planning, regeneration, health and social policy in imaginative and sophisticated ways. Today, Sadiq talks not about growth, but about good growth, and it's also a people-focused vision. As London grows, it needs to benefit all Londoners. Growth and development should bolster communities and build neighbourhoods with character. Culture is an essential ingredient in this, because as much as we need great transport and roads, London also needs its soul. It needs culture and creativity. And on the face of it, culture in London is a brilliant story. We are a great creative capital. London is the most Googled city for culture, and one of the most connected cities in the world. Museums are overflowing, awards are stacking up, tourism is booming, and the economy is boosted. However, we can't be complacent, and I want to take a moment now to outline some of the challenges we face. Because below the waterline, there are significant systematic cracks and problems that we need to fix if we are to maintain our global position and reputation. Those creatives who have colonised cheaper areas, helped build destinations and raise land values are being priced out. We need creative tribes in London, and we also need creative talent. All those pattern cutters, photographers, designers, animators and set builders are holding up this economic powerhouse that generates billions for London. Now, people sometimes say to me that this is part of the natural cycle of things, and creators will continually move into new areas of town. But as we know, there's really no cheap space left in London. And this is why you will see major new programmes in the strategy to address this. Through our creative enterprise zones, we will build areas that offer incentives to help artists and creative businesses put down roots. Incentives will range from affordable workspace to business rate relief. 10 development grants of £50,000 each have recently been distributed to 11 boroughs. And we're also setting up a creative land trust. This new trust will attract investment from public, private and social enterprise funders to secure affordable creative workspace in perpetuity. Because overseas competition is looking increasingly attractive. Lisbon and Athens have cheap spaces, better weather, and they're also staying in the EU. So global competition is a serious issue, which Brexit has amplified. Brexit is a challenge for the creative economy. The EU is the largest market for creative sector exports.
You know, you nearly there for the opening. Yeah, that's great.
1/3 of creative jobs in London are filled by the EU and international talent. We will continue to lobby government hard to get the best deal. The unprecedented speed of development also puts pressures on the cultural assets of our city. Over the last decade, we've lost 25% of clubs, 30% of artist studios, 35% of music venues, 50% of nightclubs, and 58% of LGBT venues. Because it's more profitable to turn cultural venues into luxury flats, we have lost hundreds of thriving, well-loved venues. Our stock of cultural infrastructure is in danger of collapsing. These grassroots spaces that sustain our successful creative economy are disappearing. In a way, it's a perfect storm. It's what finance people might call living on our capital assets. These creative spaces are the incubators for the next generation of artists, musicians and DJs. Adele and Ed Sheeran started in small venues before they became multi-million-pound recording artists. And Londoners care about this too. When these cultural spaces close, they're seen as symbolic. The granular and the gritty stuff matters to the character of our city. And this is why we've taken such a broad definition in our cultural strategy. Because the pub down the road, the skate park in the local green space, and the local green space are as important to Londoners as the British Museum and the National Gallery. And this is why we'll publish a cultural infrastructure plan later this year. The plan will set out what we need to sustain London's future as a cultural capital. And as part of this, we're mapping the cultural infrastructure in the city on a scale never been seen before. A key part of the cultural infrastructure plan is our Culture at Risk office, and this helps with the stream of distress calls we get from artists and venue managers and club owners. The new Draft London plan will address these issues systematically. Culture is comprehensively threaded throughout the London plan. Culture is our DNA in London, so it does follow that it should feature in our planning system. So the strategy sets out other challenges that we're seeking to address, such as access and diversity. We've just launched Cultural Seeds, which helps with the grassroots organisations, particularly those from underrepresented groups. We want to make sure the creative workforce reflects London's diversity, and we welcome feedback from all of the London Assembly members on these programmes. But before I close, I wanted to finish by outlining briefly the range of ploughs and levers the Mayor can use to achieve his vision. I've mentioned the planning framework, which is crucial. There's also direct investment, for example, through the Good Growth Fund. The Mayor is investing directly in culture on a scale we haven't seen. There's international promotion support through London and Partners. There's business support. Advocacy is also very important. The Mayor champions culture in a number of ways through his speeches, his travels, and through attending many events. Finally, the Mayor's convening power is also very important. I want to finish by saying that working in partnership is absolutely crucial to delivering this strategy. We've set out a wide range of partners in the draft, and working in partnership is key. I hope this sets the scene for why culture is such a top priority, and we very much look forward to discussing it with you and the priorities and programmes in more detail.
Thank you. That was a very broad run-through of the whole strategy that I hope the committee had a chance to read over the weekend. I just want to, before moving on to a few more questions for Justine, just ask our external guests, so Jenny, Sharon and Clare, just very, very briefly, because we're going to move on in detail to discuss the whole strategy, but if you just want to sort of give your top response to having read, to what you've read in the strategy. So just one thing that you just, that comes to mind immediately as your response to what you've read in the strategy. Can I start with you, Jenny?
I'm very interested in creative participation being at the heart of broadening the diversity of participation in the arts, and I think that this draft strategy has a number of ways of reaching people, the idea of doing things outside in public spaces, making sure that those spaces are still available to cultural participation, the Mayor's support for music in schools. There are a number of different aspects of making sure that the arts are available and engage a much broader number of people, a range of people. So I absolutely salute that.
Thank you. Sharon?
For me, it's about balance and reach, and what this strategy does is manage a very complicated environment, cultural environment, by both providing infrastructural, attacking kind of infrastructural issues, facilitating and enabling the big cultural players, not just big, all cultural players, to engage, and it's that facilitation and providing the right environment which is going to make this successful. So as a cultural delivery person, I'm very pleased with the opportunities that it will provide to organisations like mine, a museum, to do the best job we can for culture in London.
Thank you. And Clare? Just again.
I think this strategy is a brilliant piece of work. You've asked for one thing, Chair. What it does, it makes it very, very easy for me to clearly see the role that my borough can play in supporting London's strategic cultural objectives. And that makes my life fantastically easy. Which is good. Yeah, exactly. Anything to help my life be a bit easier is good.
Great, thank you. So we've got positive responses in terms of participation, facilitation, and being clear and easy to see how you can play a part in it. I think we're going to have a lot of questions that kind of dig into the relationship to the economy, and I will just start off with you, Justine, on we've got 19 policies here with 60 different commitments, and they're clearly well-received policies by people working in the cultural sector. What we would like to know is how many of those commitments have got actual programmes and funding so that they can be delivered? Are they all deliverable? And what are your timescales for doing that?
Yeah, they're all deliverable, and they've all got budgets.
They've all got budgets within this mayoral term, or
yeah. Everything that's in the strategy is deliverable. I mean, because we work very closely in partnership with a range of people to deliver this strategy. There's some things that are within the Mayor's direct gift, so programmes we have initiated and we're managing and running ourselves. And then there's other things where we work in partnership and other people lead on. But all the things that we've set out that we will deliver, I'm confident that they will all be achieved, and they've all got their own budgets and targets.
So, and the timescales for delivery, are you expecting everything that's in the strategy to happen within this mayoral term?
Some things are longer term projects. So the Museum of London is a long-term capital project. The Olympic Park is a long-term capital project. So the idea is that the strategy sets out a vision and a programme that has long-term reach and impact. We're interested in long-term sustaining London's cultural offer in the long term. So these things are deliverable in the short term, like the creative enterprise zones and the cultural infrastructure plan. Those things will be delivered, but what they'll do is hardwire culture into the way in which the city protects and celebrates culture into the future.
Thank you. Another thing around delivery is there's a huge number of partners that you're working with. I think on page 157, there's a massive list of different partners that you're working with within sort of the mayor's functional bodies, the advisory groups and boards that the mayor has, sort of agencies and organisations, then there's sort of national and regional and local government partners, creative industry partners, and kind of other sort of wider partners. So a sort of whole page of different partners. That you're,
2 pages.
2 pages that you're working with. Sorry, it's printed out, it comes out on one. But what's the risk in having all of those different partnerships in terms of the delivery of what you're trying to get done? Are you how dependent are you on all these partners for everything that's in this strategy to be delivered?
Well, partnerships are key to delivering the strategy. As you know, the mayor has got limited powers, so everything he does is largely delivered in partnership. And it's a general principle that everything we do in culture is in partnership. The culture sector itself is a very collegiate sector, works together, most of the time. I mean, we can deliver so much more in partnership. I don't think it's a risk; it's an opportunity, really. If we were to not work in partnership, that would be the risk.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, as well, this whole building is built on partnership. So, although this is a culture strategy, it is a strategy across this building. It has been brought together in partnership with our skills team. It cross-references our social integration strategy, our equality and diversity strategy, the transport strategy. So this building is built around working in partnership. And I would just support as well that the partnerships that are built around projects are very specific. They're based on expertise and they're based around shared beliefs in what needs to be achieved. So I think there's great strength in the partnerships that are within here.
Thank you. I mean, certainly the committee made a visit to Hull and we saw the kind of incredible sort of invigoration for the whole city that had come out of the whole city, kind of everyone within
together, yeah.
the different departments kind of thinking that City of Culture had something to do with them. So, yeah,
Amazing, yeah.
Partnership working is obviously something that's that works. Then the other question, Justine, for you is just about the sort of processes that you've got in place to make sure that all these policies and commitments go forward, and what the kind of monitoring processes that you've got in place so that we can actually see how you're delivering on everything with all these multiple partners.
Yeah, well, we've got the Mayor's Cultural Leadership Board, and they are the kind of guardians, really, of the strategy. They are the statutory advisory group on the strategy, and they have shaped the strategy as it stands now and will hold us to account in terms of delivering that strategy. So that's one aspect of it in a statutory context. But of course, every single project has got its own milestones, it's got its own kind of metrics. So each one has a delivery kind of programme attached to it. So I can give you some examples if you'd like, just to bring it to life. If you look at the Mayor's Creative Industries Economic Investment Programme, that covers London Fashion Week, Film London, the Design Festival, Games Festival. The target for that programme is to secure over 1 billion in new sales, exports and inward investment. That target is broken down between those different creative industry kind of subsectors. That programme will create over 9,000 jobs, 650 apprenticeships and traineeships. If you look at infrastructure, the Cultural Infrastructure Plan, that will be kind of really groundbreaking new programme for the city. It will establish a baseline.
When will we see the cultural infrastructure plan?
That'll be launched this year.
This year?
Yeah. Some aspects have been launched already. So we've got the pubs research out already, music venues, dance spaces, but the full thing will be launched later in the year.
And do you think that's the best way, for instance, for the Economy Committee to keep track of
the infrastructure
of your
plan?
progress? Yeah, or is there? Because you said you were reading out the details of one particular project there. How do we? What is there that's published that we can keep, so that we can keep track in terms of delivery?
Well, there are. I mean, that's Sharon wants to talk about the monitoring.
So we have put in place a culture performance monitoring process. We are measuring and reporting through on a quarterly basis, which will come to the Assembly on a quarterly basis, a range of measures which have been agreed by this building and by the Assembly around output. So that will be a mix of statistics which will feed into the figures, such as the ones that Justine's just been referencing, and then underneath that, so as well as the kind of qualitative or more quantitative reporting coming through that process, we'll be commissioning evaluations alongside the major programmes. So for example, we have a 4-year evaluation with the Audiences Agency, which is running alongside London Borough of Culture. And obviously, as we gain information through those evaluations, we will want to publish those as quickly as we can so that that's useful on a wider basis, which is why we've taken the decision around the cultural infrastructure plan that we will publish the data as we go along and bring that together as a suite of information with some reflection on that before the end of the year as well.
Great, thank you very much. That's useful to understand. I'm now going to bring in, sorry, I've lost my list of who was coming in the next bit.
Yeah.
It's you, Chair.
I think it's
you.
me.
It is you, Tom. Thank you.
Oh, no.
Fiona wanted to come in
Sorry.
first. That's it. Sorry.
That's okay, Chair. Thank you. On page 43, you mentioned another list of questions for Justine. So there's a list of other strategies that sort of aren't covered in this strategy, but have got some cultural significance. So that's the food, digital technology, immersive retail, and I think sports mentioned somewhere else as something that's covered elsewhere. But obviously, these strategies will also, or the sort of areas, will also have quite significant cultural aspects to them. I wondered how you'll make sure that your team is properly linked up with the teams who are covering those areas to make sure that the cultural aspects don't get lost in the mix.
Yeah, well, we've got a cross GLA working groups called the Culture Delivery Group, and so members from all of the different strategy teams come to that group. There's also a PAN strategy group, so the strategy group makes sure that everything is correctly cross-referenced in the documents, and the delivery group is about making sure from a delivery perspective everything's joined up. So working with the health team on pilots, working with the social integration team on various projects. There's a lot of kind of joint working, but it all comes together through those two meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. We're now going to move on to look at the kind of Love London idea that's threaded through the strategy, and I'm going to bring in Tom Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my first question is initially to Justine and to Ben. How will the strategy help to improve participation in culture and arts?
This strategy is really, it's called Culture for All. So participation is absolutely at the heart of this strategy. But what we know is that only a third of Londoners feel that they're making the most of the capital's culture. So, hence this being a kind of core priority within the document. Some of the barriers people face are affordability, travel. A lot of people don't travel outside their local area. Sometimes there are disability and mobility issues. And sometimes people feel that culture just isn't for them. So lots of the programmes are about addressing access and participation, particularly to groups of people in London who don't access culture. So just to give you a few examples, London Borough Culture is flagship programme, and that will engage hundreds of thousands of Londoners in culture on their doorsteps. I think that's the key thing, on their doorsteps. That's the key thing. It's about kind of really celebrating local culture, local creativity, and putting on world-class events that everyone can access and bring people together. Within the London Borough of Culture programme, there are also these culture impact projects, so they're more targeted projects around particular ideas, and we've got projects that we're funding with older people on housing estates and with looked after children in care homes. And then the third element is the Culture Seeds programme, and that was announced by the Mayor on Friday. And that is £1 million worth of micro grants, and that is really all about grassroots culture. It's targeting people in small groups who generally don't get access to the big funding schemes because they're just too small. You know, and it's £1,000 up to £5,000. And we know from pilots we've done before that often if you can get a grant for £1,000 or £2,000, it can really make a big idea happen. It can be the renting of a space, it can be the hiring of a tutor.
Even smaller than that sometimes.
Even smaller, yeah. A tiny amount of money can catalyse, you know, fantastic ideas. So the microgrants Culture Seeds programme kind of sits as part of a pyramid where you've got the kind of flagship London Borough of Culture at the top of it. Then you've got these impact awards that are, you know, flagship programmes within other different boroughs. And then across the whole of London, the Culture Seeds programme is just an invitation to local groups and individuals to come up and tell us about their creative idea.
Could you say a bit more? So under policy or commitment 1.5, it said launch 2 pilots to increase cultural engagement amongst Londoners. Could you say a bit more about that?
That was the idea of lots of different cities have discount cards. New York's got one, Amsterdam's got one, and we're interested in whether there is something we can do in London in that kind of format that would again add to this suite of ideas to improve access. We haven't jumped straight into it, and the reason is because it's already a crowded market space. There's lots of discount schemes out there, and so that's why we're running a pilot, and it'll be with the Zip Oyster card.
It'll be
with the Zip Oyster card.
Oh yes,
I don't know if you want to add more to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we also have the second pilot, which is in collaboration with the Team London team here. So looking at how we can offer rewards for young people to encourage them to volunteer and then to engage with culture as an outcome of that volunteering. And then there's actually a third piece of research which we're just kicking off with our communities team here, who are running a citizen-led engagement programme. So they're working with groups of different characteristics of people in different communities around London who are undertaking their own research, and we have asked them to undertake their own research into what Love London could mean for them. I think, as Justine says, what is most important is that if we are to offer access, it is for those who need and want it. And that we're really targeting around that. So taking some time to understand that is key.
Because one of the problems with a lot of the discount schemes is that it just goes to people who would go to the theatre already, but they're just getting it at a discount. I think that, or you know, whichever sort of cultural activity. So.
Could I just add something at this point? I think it's very, very significant, the move to take culture to different communities across London. Over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of work to persuade, remember our cultural infrastructure is very centrally located, is to persuade institutions to work with other parts of the city, and it's been an uphill task, to be honest. So this policy shift to try and create new initiatives to take culture to other parts of the city is quite significant, and London Borough of Culture being the kind of flagship initiative there. And I think now the first 2 boroughs have been awarded. I think we're seeing a significant number of new partnerships. I know of cultural organisations who were waiting to see who won before they offered their help and support for that borough. So I think that'd be very interesting how many new partnerships come out of that relationship.
I'd love to go into London Borough of Culture, but I think
the
other members is going to be bringing it up later, so I won't go into that now, but we will be coming back to it. What about, because there's audience participation, but also there's workforce participation and diversity there. So could you talk a bit about what the strategy will do to improve participation in workforce, whether it's, you know, in a technical sense or, you know, in a performing sense, you know, across the board?
Yeah. Well, the Mayor wants the creative workforce to reflect London's population. Diversity is good for business, gender diversity on senior teams boosts performance, ethnically diverse companies get better returns. We know all of this, it's statistically proven. However, the creative workforce is only 23% BMAE compared to 33% across London's workforce as a whole. And also 92% of the creative workforce are from so-called advantaged backgrounds. So we have got some...
92%?
92%, yeah. So, you know, we've got a job to be, there's a job to be done. Some of the barriers are there's not enough opportunities for young talent to engage with the arts. There's a lack of diverse role models at all levels. Pay is very low. Average salary of an artist, £10,000. And also recruitment processes tend to not be so transparent. It's a very kind of SME type industry. So it's very easy to kind of pick up the phone and call the person you know. So all of these things act as barriers against kind of changing the profile of the industry. Some of the things we're doing, we've recently included a new element into the London Borough of Culture scheme. It's called the Creative Entrepreneurs Programme, and that means that young creatives in the winning boroughs will have support, and they'll be able to join kind of fellowships really to help them build their creative businesses. And that's all targeted at BAME communities. The Culture Seeds I mentioned, the Cultural Leadership Board have got a subgroup looking at this issue, and we are commissioning some research on what is already out there, because the industry realises it's a problem, and there are lots of schemes out there, but when you look at the global statistics, they haven't added up to shifting the dial. They haven't created that sea change. So our question is, you know, who's doing what? We don't want to duplicate, but our question is really, what can the mayor do that will really add value to everything that's happening and shift the dial on it? London Music Fund supports young musicians. 65% of recipients are BAME. We're doing a lot of advocacy. We've been working with Lenny Henry, who's got a campaign around diversity with Ofcom. And Film London, our film agency, they have got a new equal access network training initiative again. So there's lots and lots of initiatives, but we haven't cracked it yet. So this remains a priority.
Do you think the devolution of the skills budget presents an opportunity, a bigger opportunity now for the mayor going forward to try and improve diversity in that sense? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, already there's the digital talent programme. That's the 7 million to improve young people's digital skills, but 300k of that is on the creative industries, and that work is targeted at BAME and women in the industry. But as you say, I think there's much more scope as the skills money starts to get developed.
Could I add something on education? Many of the ideas and policies point to more work in education. In a previous role, I was a governor of the University Arts London, which is a parental body of most of the art and design schools in London. And while I was there, we faced this same issue, that there wasn't enough talent coming through from the different communities in London. And you know, clearly there is a line from school education into higher education and into employment. And we saw our role as a higher education institution to try and encourage that. We did lots of work in schools, from primary schools onwards. We encountered resistance from parents. People didn't want their children necessarily to go and work within the creative sector. So there was an education role in terms of informing parents about the opportunities of the sector. So it's a big issue that involves a lot of work across a lot of different organisations.
And so I've now forgotten the next point I was going to make. Never mind. I'm sure it'll come back to me if it's important. I mean, one thing that's been put to me before is that people talk about, for example, the barrier of fees, for example, to go to to go into higher education, drama school, or wherever. But actually, someone said it's more the sort of, I think it's the average of 3 years that people are essentially expected to work for free after that because they're not being paid. I mean, I'm sure that you've been engaging with, for example, equity and it's not Back 2 anymore, they've merged, but with the sort of trade unions in this sector, have you been engaging with them on the sort of low pay, no pay issue?
Yeah. We've had a round table with all the unions actually on pay, definitely, yeah.
And finally, to you, Justine, what do you think we can learn from, we sort of talked about this a bit, from Hull and their experience from City of Culture?
What we can learn, I think, are a number of things. One is how important it is to have culture champions at the top level, at a leadership level. So what was really clear was that, you know, the local authority held their nerve. You know, they bid for Hull City of Culture, they won it. And, you know, it didn't just spring out of nowhere. You know, then there was quite a few years of development. You know, the whole of the kind of city centre was dug up, you know, everyone was getting annoyed about it, and they held their nerve, you know, and that really made a big difference because it opened all the doors and it gave confidence. I think the other thing we learn is about volunteers. You know, we were met by these great volunteers at the station. It was a really important part of the programme in Hull, the volunteering, and we learned that in the Olympics too, you know, that kind of civic pride, that way in which people can kind of get involved in their city was really, really palpable. And the commissioning as well, the ideas and the work, you know, you can't, you need a world-class culture, you need great art as well. So I think those three things were the learnings.
Quite interesting, one of the things they said when we visited was they've only just started building housing for sale again, because until recently the cost of building the homes was more than the value that they could sell them for. Now, of course, you can go too far the other way, and you end up then, if it goes too far the other way, forcing people out. And I think you sort of alluded to this during your opening statement to an extent. You know, how do we balance up these things in terms of regeneration? But it was quite an interesting point that they made. Sharon, could I come to you in terms of engaging with more diverse audiences? What do you think we can learn from your experience at the Museum of London?
Well, first of all, it's a relentless and enduring task, and you just have to be really creative as an organisation. It's really important that funding bodies, sponsoring organisations, government, like the Mayor of London, like Arts Council, like other funders, really hold organisations to task, actually, so that embedded in our projects, in grant applications, all sorts of things, are very important commitments to really focusing on diversity. So it's embedded in the funding mechanisms, which I think is really important. And then it's about partnership and being creative. So some of the things that we're doing, working again with partners and funders, small things like which replicates some of the elements of the strategy we see here. Small amounts of funding can make a big difference. So just simply providing about £300 to a school to make a visit to a cultural institution facilitates that. Now it's and focusing those small grants on schools that are in receipt of get a high percentage of pupil premium, and focusing those grants on schools who haven't visited a cultural institution or attraction in central London for 2 years. So in other words, you can facilitate through kind of quite rigorous but small mechanisms a kind of engagement from broad populations. And that's just a kind of opening access. So I would advocate and feel very pleased about kind of the range of mechanisms which are being deployed in this strategy.
And just finally from me to Jenny, of course you have a great experience of engaging with very diverse and having mass participation, very diverse communities from your experience with 2012 Olympics and Paralympics. Could you talk a bit about how you think we can, from that experience, how we can engage with more diverse communities?
Thank you. I think we've taken from the London 2012 Festival and the work we did there two kind of big learnings. One is about free events and one is about creative participation. So 1418 Now is another national UK-wide programme, as the London 2012 Festival was, led by London, but a UK-wide programme. In that project, we did projects such as Piccadilly Circus with Justine and her team here, which was a hugely successful way of bringing very large numbers of people into the heart of London, into Piccadilly Circus and Regent Street, around circus theme and extraordinary aerial work. And the diversity of that audience was very noticeable, as was the diversity of the performers. From that and from Jeremy Deller's Sacrilege, where the bouncy castle of Stonehenge was taken to communities all around London and indeed around the UK, we've taken those as kind of examples. So for 1418 Now, programme around the centenary of the First World War, very, very different topic, very different atmosphere all around it. But looking at the same kind of things. So the artist Jeremy Deller, having had that success, we invited him to create a piece for the centenary of the first day of the Battle of the Somme. And his Somme soldiers, the We're Here Because We're Here soldiers who appeared on stations and in shopping centres around the UK, were deliberately placed in places where people are. They went to, it's a sort of modern memorial in a way, a modern form of commemoration. It went to where people are. As a result, 2 million people saw that project live, 2,000 volunteers participated in it, and 63% of the UK population, 30 million people, were aware of it by the end of the day. The reason for that is that it went all across London, all across the United Kingdom, to places where people work, people play, families go, people travel. And the demographic of the audience, both in terms of age, in terms of social class, in terms of cultural diversity, mirrors almost exactly the demographic of the UK, as you would expect, because it was done for people where they are. And being able to engage people, we did quite a lot of research through a YouGov poll in the week afterwards. The emotional engagement that people felt, either because they had seen the soldiers and engaged with them, or because they had received it through social media, 330 million impressions by the end of that weekend, or they'd seen it on television, was equally profound in each of those cases. And so we felt that we were reaching people of a huge diversity with something that was able to bring people together. And I think that that's one of the things that culture can do and why we're so interested in this particular cultural strategy.
Is that it from you, Tom? I'm bring in Fiona and then Sean before we move on to Tony.
Thank you. This was a point about diversity, increasing diversity. I was pleased to see that the strategy mentions paid internships as an important way that the sector can be opened up. The next paragraph mentions the good work standard. Will unpaid internships be a bar for people getting the good work standard?
Yes.
Yes, good, okay. And then similarly, sort of networks, and the 92% stat is quite scary, really, in terms of the amount of work that's going to have to be done to sort of open up the sector. Would there also be an expectation then that internships would be advertised to avoid people just sort of using their networks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know if you saw a few weeks ago the Mayor of LA that announced an internship scheme, particularly with the entertainment industry, because they have found exactly the same thing that we found. The appetite is there, but it's such a kind of pick up the phone, who you know type industry, that it's really kind of going against the kind of natural grain of how the thing operates. So we're actively looking at other schemes around the world and what we might do in London in this space, because you're right, it's a really important priority.
Are you getting buy-in from the sector on this point?
Yeah, we're just starting, and under Ben's leadership, there's a subgroup looking at this in a dedicated fashion around the Mayor's Cultural Leadership Board. We're doing our own, we've commissioned our own piece of research. Yeah, I'm having lots of conversations. Everyone knows that they need to crack it, but I think the question for us is, what is the most useful and powerful thing the Mayor can do in this space to kind of galvanise the industry? I think we'll end up with a series of roundtables on it, industry-based. At the moment, it's a series of conversations, a working group and research, and I think the next stage will be a series of roundtables, and then we will define out of that what the Mayor's policy can be in a more delivery-focused way very soon.
And obviously the GLA is not the only player in the field in terms of policy in this area. Do the government buy into sort of making sure that diversity is increased in the creative industries as well? Are they having active policies to help promote this as well?
What have the government got, do you know?
I think it's less of a priority for central government, to be honest. I can't think of an initiative at this point that has been led by the department.
But some of the big funders, such as HLF and Arts Council England, really are committed to this.
The conditions of grants might include it. Okay.
Yeah, the Arts Council have got their core criteria is the creative case for diversity, and so you don't get funding at the Arts Council if you don't meet that criteria. It's their kind of number one criteria. So Sharon's right, that lots of the Quangos and the NDPBs are embedding it into their work.
Part of that main challenge and which in terms of the Mayor's leverage there are limited ways in which we can respond is that access to creative education. I mean, we've seen a 30% drop in art subjects being studies, which is a huge issue for the talent pipeline for the sector, both on a social level and an economic level. And that really is something that needs to be addressed. And research shows that this is not just about studying creative subjects in order to go on to a creative career. It's about how it affects your chances in other areas, whether it's using music to improve your maths performance or theatre to improve your literature and other responses. They're absolutely entwined. So having creative thinkers in our future is key.
Thank you.
Sean, you wanted to come in.
This is a question to all of you, really. It's about cultural diversity. Obviously, London, probably as a world city, has the biggest number of ethnic groups across it. How is this strategy engaging different ethnic groups to express the culture from which they come in an artistic fashion? Where's that activity? Could someone give me an idea of where that is?
The programmes that are in the strategy, for example, so the London Borough of Culture has a dedicated programme I mentioned called the Creative Entrepreneurs Programme. So that is absolutely about targeting BMAE communities, developing young talent. It's like a kind of fellowship programme. The Schools Awards, it happens in every single borough. The London Music Fund, 65% of the recipients, they're young musicians, are from BMAE backgrounds. And that scheme is interesting because, for example, what we find is that music in schools gets taught to a level, and then once you kind of leave primary school, you have to start paying for tuition. So what happens is the talented kids who can't afford to pay for the tuition don't carry on. So the Mayor's Music Fund is a bridging scholarship fund. So all the teachers in London identify young people with talent, and then they are then eligible for a Mayor's Music Fund grant, and that bridges them into paid for training and means they get into conservatoires and they've developed them, so it's quite a kind of targeted.
But within that scheme, and it sounds slightly less likely, but I'm looking for, is there any evidence that we are saying to our very, very culturally rich city, we respect your culture and want to add your experience, your cultural talent and perspective to ours? If I met a kid recently, he's Mongolian, and he spoke to me about the instruments he'd learned to play and national dress and stuff. Is there somewhere for him to express that? My parents are Jamaican, my neighbours from South India. Is there any place where this strategy picks them up if they have some artistic?
You can see in the strategy as well, not run by our team, run by the events team, but wrapped into our strategy are all the cultural events and the festivals, so Chinese New Year and Eid and all the different festivals that are celebrated, the Mela. So that is a big platform. I mean, London has got the biggest festival programme, I think, of any world city in that regard. And that is a growing programme. So there's the big festivals and events, and then it's embedded within all the individual programmes.
And one last tiny question about class. So I could get this wrong, and you know, you have an opinion, but I am a Londoner. I was born and bred, and my experience of London cultural scene, it's very dominated by the middle and upper middle classes. Even if you see what's on in the theatre, all the heroes seem to be some sort of middle class background. Is there somewhere where, you know, if I am of good working class stock, that I can find some place to express that, you know, the different kind of musics we like, or the different things that are put on at the theatre, or the art, where, you know, could I truly go to one of the big galleries and see something that represented the class of people from which I came?
To the Museum of London.
Okay, is there any more? Yes, because I want it to be celebrated, not only be sort of, you know, the poor of London, look how bad it has been for us. You know, I want to also it to be celebrated. You know, our only cultural output shouldn't be EastEnders, if you know what I mean. Thank you, Chair. I'm done.
Socio-economic status is not a protected characteristic, but for us it's absolutely bound up in that. It's a core part of the research that the Cultural Leadership Board have been leading on. I think, you know, where those places and spaces for engagement are and who gets to engage with them is running through every kind of programme and output that we are touching. For example, with the Cultural Infrastructure Plan, we're working with the communities team to think about the different kinds of spaces that people have and access and come together around. So it's absolutely top in our priorities.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing I'd say is, you know, as Jenny said, you know, free culture is really important, you know, because some people think, you know, it's not for me, you know, what is it, you know, a gallery can be quite an intimidating place. And, you know, just as, you know, Jenny saw with her national statistics, when we did a range of free events for the Olympics, again, the demographic of Londoners was exactly mirrored in the audiences for all those free events. And what was the difference? They were free and they were all over London, you know, they were on your doorstep. London Borough of Culture really picks up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really key for us as part of our bit, that we would be focusing on giving people opportunities for culture on every corner. I've seen in my experience as a councillor since I was elected in 2010, people who are absolutely the people we want to be attracting into spaces, whether they're libraries or museums, walking past the front door because they don't feel as though it's for them. They don't feel a sense of entitlement in the way that other groups would. So really, for us, it's about making everybody feel included. And it's not sort of handing culture down to people. It's celebrating events like the one we had last weekend with Lake of Stars, so showcasing incredible international talent in the borough and enabling people to see those absolutely stunning performances. And really gelling the community together. I was thinking before I came here today, you know, what are the risks if London doesn't get this right, and what are the risks if outer London doesn't play its full part? And I think Paris is a really powerful example of the risks that you see when you see the outer communities, the outer ring, the banlieue, feel increasingly divided from the centre, and that those socio-economic groups and ethnic groups are increasingly excluded from what becomes what is a very rich and effective cultural offer in the centre that people visit, but that those outer areas are completely detached and the divide grows ever greater. So it needs boroughs like mine, and that's why it's so fantastic that we've been awarded this, along with Brent, are able to play our full part in London's cultural life.
I think as well, you know, one of the things, what you asked, someone asked about what we learned from Hull. I think hand on heart, you know, the people of Hull think culture is for them.
Yeah.
You know, after that is part of the legacy. You know, it is something that is for us.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what.
But do we have an additional challenge of just the sheer size? So you would say Brent is inner London. I wouldn't, because I live in Cavering. I used to live in Brent.
Yeah.
Brent is inner London. It's not outer London. We have a scale issue. We have more diversity, which I actually think is probably a strength. It isn't Tom Temore from it.
There's a map. We can settle this outside.
I worry because I live in Clavering. We have a great local theatre, but how much are we encouraging people to build that up as well? But
I think for me that's exactly what the London Borough of Culture will achieve. That's exactly what it's doing. We have the night tube for the Central Line and the Victoria Line, so we have the infrastructure, the investment has been delivered by the Mayor, and that's a wonderful opportunity. I've just bought another theatre because that seemed like a brilliant idea, and it certainly will be. But it's about how you make sure that every bit of land, for all the reasons that Justine was setting out earlier, you know, we've lost so many spaces, we've lost so many pubs, we've lost so many venues out of the centre for a whole host of reasons. If Outer London then doesn't come forward, whether that's Havering or whether that's my borough, Waltham Forest, then you risk those spaces disappearing altogether. And the city will lose out, our next generation will lose out, but also will lose out in terms of our economy.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Tony in now.
I think you may have already stolen my thunder, Sean, but anyway. Congratulations, Clare, on your new status as the London Borough of Culture.
Thank you.
How is it going to help attract tourists and visitors beyond Zone 1, please?
So people coming in from inner to outer, or more generally?
More generally.
Okay, yeah. So we have an extraordinary cultural offer in Waltham Forest already with the William Morris Gallery. We have visitors from all over the world. We've recently opened Walthamstow Wetlands, which is 500 acres of incredible open space. It's over 5 times the size of Barnes Wetlands. We have great history. We have other museums and facilities across our borough. We have this opportunity to play a part in London's cultural offer today and into the future. Also, our residents have an extraordinary range of talents that can be brought to the fore. And for me, it's how I connect those people with those opportunities elsewhere, and how we connect the whole of London with Waltham Forest and Brent and other partner boroughs as we go forward. Because London can't survive if everything is just focused in the centre. I think what Justine was saying earlier about this and it's not a creep towards the east or the west. It's like these big statements, you know, this significant investment. Having these new jobs in Dagenham will be incredibly exciting for me and my residents. They're a bus journey away. You know, you couldn't say that before. So it's about all of us playing our part, using the resources that we've got, showcasing what we've got, and then all of our residents feeling like they're involved. And I'll give you an example. There's a mill community space in my ward and my borough that I was involved in setting up, and it's become a wonderful community hub, and we give out very small grants of £500, £2,000, £3,000, and people feel included in that space. They feel as though they're allowed to go through that door and access the exhibitions, the arts and the culture. And before they didn't, exactly the people we wanted to get in the door felt that they were excluded and had to walk past. And it's about how we get people into these spaces, because otherwise the talent is walking past the door, and you know, we can't afford to see that continue.
In terms of a lasting legacy, you've got a couple more examples, and also I'm a great believer in that awful, I know accountants always use it, but if you don't measure it, you don't achieve it. So if you've got any particular KPIs?
Yeah. So for me, there are some significant steps that have already been taken following us being awarded the first ever London Borough of Culture. I was then in a position really to make a bold statement and to purchase a heritage cinema in the centre of Walthamstow that we will be transforming with the help of partners, because you can't do anything without your partnerships. And only last week we gave permission for a further cinema to be restored in the north of the borough. And really that is a clear statement that we wouldn't have been able to make previously. Obviously, officers will be aware of the detail and the KPIs that sit behind our London Borough of Culture bid. For me, as a politician, it's about that being able to see the physical difference, but then also to have the experience of residents reported back to me as we see those projects delivered. But as Justine mentioned, we had 15,000 residents who supported our bid, and the response that we're already getting about people feeling included, the response hasn't been, you won, didn't you? It's, we won, didn't we? It's brilliant. And I think that's been really, really key for me. So the sky's the limit. It's very exciting.
Brilliant, thank you.
Could I just add something to that, if that's okay, which is about reputation. You know, and what we will get is a new portfolio of stories from Waltham Forest that can be told in every way across the city. And I think there's this kind of latent pride in where you come from, and we all try and frame our own neighbourhood and our own area. And I think if we, the outcome of this is that local people are much of a stronger cohesion and pride about being from Waltham Forest, and have a series of stories that they can illustrate that. That's a massive gain. And, you know, one of the pillars of this strategy, you know, the World City is really about our reputation, not just globally, but about reputation to ourselves and our own domestic audiences as well.
Just a tiny example, if I may. When we handed in our bid here at City Hall, we brought primary school children from Ainsleywood Primary School, and we came with Bob and Roberta Smith, who obviously makes slogan art, and he'd made placards. And to see tiny children holding works of art and asking me questions about them, like, does Sadiq Khan really work here? And am I really allowed to hold this? And to see their excitement, but also there was no sense that they weren't allowed to join in. There was no sense that it wasn't for them. It was, they were part of what we were doing. And they were so excited by it. It was, you know, worth it. All of it is worth it to see that.
Thank you. And moving on to Shonagh, what do you hope to achieve with the Cultural Seeds programme, please, and how will you evaluate how public money has been well spent?
Well, this is a hugely exciting programme, I think, and as someone who's 6 months into my role here, I think it's a hugely exciting programme for a city hall to be undertaking. What we really want to build and show throughout this is that that money is going to those who aren't engaging as widely in other programmes. We're going to develop as light touch an approach to it as we can, so there'll be a range of 10 questions that people can apply into. We're working with a really reputable grant management company who are experienced in this area, who we've appointed through a tender process. So they are going to make sure that the accessibility factor on this programme is really high. What we then want to do around that is work through, again, a number of partnerships. So we'll be road showing and going out with different groups and asking them to represent that fund. We already have begun that process, so the launch on Friday of the Culture Strategy and the programme at Battersea Arts Centre also involved a range of community groups, and they are our first best advocates for that programme. So really we have to make sure that it gets to those who aren't benefiting in other ways, and I'm confident that we've got the right factors in place for that.
In terms of the spending public money well, if you're going out and public money going to diverse groups, which is great, but you've always got to make sure the money is actually well spent. How are you going to do that?
Absolutely. So there'll be an evaluation piece in place around this as well. We'll be looking at all sorts of factors, so as much of the qualitative information that we can gain, but also looking qualitatively about what those groups wanted to achieve and how they went about achieving that. And we can bring all of that learning into other programmes as well, so it will be useful not just in assessing how well we did with that programme and the potential for that programme, but also thinking across our others as well.
Could you write to us on the second point separately? I think it's one of those things I don't expect you to answer now, but I think how you spend public money is so important.
Absolutely.
If you reflect and come back, that would be helpful.
Of course, thank you.
There's also a team of contracted a grant management company who's got they've got a great track record.
Yes, they're called Groundwork.
And they're really good at kind of, you know, robust kind of analysis and, you know, anti-fraud, all those kind of, you know, all that due diligence. They've got a great track record, so that is part and parcel of this programme.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just picking up on the Culture Seeds, is there kind of long-term support for the groups? You know, these are very small groups, you know, small projects. What kind of long-term support is there to kind of help them keep going?
It's a fascinating time for us because obviously when Culture Seeds was brought together, we wanted to develop a Culture Seeds network around it. So we are kind of using a kind of grant funder plus model to ensure that people who are applying in and receiving money through the programme will also have a network to support them in thinking about how they get the most from that and how they network with each other. But obviously the Mayor has also launched the Young Londoners Fund, which is a £45 million programme across 3 years, and culture, along with sport and education and youth engagement, is a huge part of that programme. So I would hope that community groups and individuals who are being successful through Culture Seeds could also look towards this larger fund where you can apply for grants of £30,000 and up, and could also look to other funds which we can signpost for them, like the Arts Council and other public funds, to take their ideas further. We really hope that we can build some confidence in receiving grants.
And that kind of signposting is coming from City Hall?
Yes, and we'll be able to do that through City Hall and the other teams, but specifically through the Culture Seeds network as well.
Mm-hmm. And you've got the I mean, that sounds like dealing with lots and lots of small groups, but you've got the capacity within City Hall to be able to handle that scale.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I will now bring Fiona Twycross in on culture and good growth.
Thank you. My first question is primarily to Justine and Ben. We hear quite a lot about the Mayor's ambition to achieve good growth, and I just wondered, you did mention it in your introduction, Justine, but in what ways the culture strategy contributes to achieving that objective?
Thank you. Well, good growth means that London should grow without leaving Londoners out. For us, good growth means not obliterating character. Good growth means not undermining community cohesion. So these ideas of people and places and prosperity are all, part and parcel of good growth. And of course, good growth is the guiding principle within the London Plan, Mayor's Draft London Plan. And that's why we see a lot of culture embedded in the London Plan. It's the most pro-culture London Plan ever. And so really the London Plan is looking to support culture at all different levels. Mm-hmm. The Good Growth Fund has funded 19 projects with culture, and those projects have culture as a strong component. The Cultural Infrastructure Plan can support good growth because at the moment we don't know what the baselines are, so we need to know those baselines about venues and spaces, etc. And then we'll be supporting the boroughs and developers with evidence and tools. We're doing design guides. What does it mean to create a new workspace? What does it mean to create a new dance space, a new theatre? Giving kind of advice and guidance. But really the London Plan is, a fantastic document this time. We've got all kinds of measures in there: Cultural Infrastructure Plan, Creative Enterprise Zones, the Agent of Change. All of these things help support the principle of good growth.
Thank you. And I wonder, Clare, if you could comment on what your interpretation of what good growth would be, and how you feel that the culture strategy can support this mayoral ambition.
Absolutely. There are two really key examples in my borough that spring to mind. One is around the Lea Bridge station, which we opened a couple of years ago. We've got the potential for 4,500 new homes in that area, but it's our objective to make sure that culture is embedded there. I'm reminded of one developer who'd got an ambition. They came along and said, can we buy the whole site? And we said, well, we don't own it, and we've got separate parts of it, but tell us what your idea is. And then their idea was that they would build a load of identikit flats in a load of identikit blocks and have one sculpture in the middle. And depending on how much you paid for your flat, you could see either a bigger or a smaller bit of the sculpture. So, yeah, we didn't see them again. But you can see when it's poorly done, or it's done in a sort of tokenistic way. It's not real. It's not London. It doesn't reflect London's history. It doesn't think about London's future. It doesn't think about the future of our communities. So we've got this very large area where we've got potential to embed culture. But to give an example, where we were very lucky to get one of the Good Growth Fund pots for just over £400,000 to invest in one of our libraries in our most deprived ward, in our borough, in Lea Bridge ward. And it takes that library from being what is a very old-fashioned space that does not serve the needs of that community in any way, shape or form, that it ticks a box for some middle-class parents who feel that they're, you know, free to use it and will do so. But in terms of being a cultural and community space, it wasn't offering it, it wasn't doing anything. There was no space to have English language classes, for example. And the Good Growth Fund will enable us to open that space out, to use the garden, but also to build an extension. That will mean it's accessible for people with disabilities. That will mean it breathes life into a whole chunk of my borough where people are generally left behind. So that will be incredible.
Thank you. And going back to Justine, you mentioned the draft London plan and the extent to which culture is reflected in it. Now, part of that is about sort of protection of some of the spaces and venues and what's already there. Is it actually possible for mayoral policy to protect small grassroots venues, and how would this be done in practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those partnership questions. I mean, we're not a kind of planning authority or a licensing body over a small music venue. There are many different reasons why music venues are at risk at a grassroots level. One is national planning policy, and permitted development has had a negative impact on grassroots music venues. Noise complaints have had a negative impact, licensing, you know, kind of arguments and debates. And also the economic side of it. You know, these are venues that are really vital talent incubators, but you know, the model is quite tight. You know, they're quite hand-to-mouth small venues. So what we're seeking to do is use where we can the mayor's influence and powers. And so through the London plan, one of the things we've brought in for the first time is the agent of change. And that's a kind of policy that pre-agent of change, if you move in next to a music venue or a club, you can then complain that you've moved in next to a music venue or club. So and what the agent of change does is puts the onus on the agent of that change. So if you are a developer building a block of flats next to a music venue, it's on you, the developer, to soundproof those flats. Equally, if you are a music venue moving into a new residential area, it's on you, the music venue, to manage your queues and make sure you've got the correct soundproofing, etc. So it's a much kind of fairer planning policy. And we're seeing now that national government is very interested in picking that up. There's been a number of debates in the House of Lords. So, you know, these are areas where I think the mayor can lead the way, can have a leadership position on this stuff.
I mean, perhaps I could illustrate that with one example. The Wapping project, which had been in an area, a much changed area of London over a long period of time. 2 new residents managed to close it down. And it just shows you the vulnerability of venues, because someone's moved into the area and they want it to be as if they lived in the countryside with no animation from the city around them. So, you know, the agent of change is a wholly good thing in our view.
And we have, through the new Culture at Risk Office, also supported in lots of other ways. I mean, sometimes it's about organisations that need help with the listing application, or it's that we can put them in touch through our GLA economics team with data that they might need for planning applications. So there have been lots of other ways that we've, not just through convening powers or policies in the London plan, been able to help with grassroots venues and some of the issues that they face.
I mean, essentially what we've got is the kind of immediate, the medium term and the long term. So the immediate is, I really need help with my venue today. I need help on negotiating my business rates, my licence, etc. And that's the hotline in the team called Culture at Risk. Then there's lots of the policies in the London plan, the agent of change, and also the CEZ's programme, creative enterprise zones. You know, they will protect venues. Lots of different kind of medium-term work. Amy LeMay, the Night Czar, works a lot with music venues to support them. And then the kind of longer-term hardwiring of this into the planning system through agent of change.
And the Culture at Risk Office, which was obviously mentioned within the strategy, and Shonagh's just mentioned, is that a standalone team, or do they have other responsibilities? I mean, because that's a new team within the...
Yeah, we say team, it's part of the culture team.
Yeah.
It's an officer within the culture team who's on the hotline.
and they basically work full-time on the Culture at Risk. Okay, and how many members of staff is that?
There's one dedicated officer who also works directly with the Night Czar, with our music team, for example, so with the cultural infrastructure plan, officer. So there are a range of them for whom this is a big part of their job description, and one dedicated officer who's on that full time.
And so how many quick inquiries have they already dealt with? I mean, how long has this been in existence?
I could bring you the number. I mean, we have anything up to 100 live cases. There's a caseload of up to 100 at any one time. I've got, a list of 30 or so successfully closed or overturned cases. We could bring you a figure for how many have been looked at.
It's quite interesting because the strategy was the first time I'd read about it, but it seems to be something that actually could play an important part in sort of protecting some of the venues.
Often it's like the rapid response kind of hotline, and often it is just, how do I get an asset of community value registration? Can you give me advice on licensing? And now that we've got this one person, we've got a kind of intelligence set in the building. So often, it's just about advice. People don't know where to go.
How do people find out about it? I mean, how do these cases come in? Is it just general queries to
we get loads. I think because we have, and the Mayor has kind of set out the importance quite publicly of grassroots spaces and of cultural infrastructure. We get a lot of letters, we get a lot of Twitter, we get lots of people writing in and calling us asking for help. So they're all deferred to culture at risk person.
Thank you. Going back to my set questions, Clare, I wondered if you could outline how the culture strategy and the draft London plan help local authorities to support and protect cultural or small workplaces.
Protecting workspace and developing new workspace is just so important, so important to us, and we've got some nice examples. I think starting with the draft London plan, I think the way it's constructed is incredibly helpful. So we can see the housing numbers, but there are also the way it's structured means that we can take elements of the plan and just apply them within the local authority. We've done a lot of work around agent of change, which I just applaud. I think it's absolutely brilliant. We've all had those complaints as local councillors about, noise from a primary school of children laughing, and it's like, really, you're not going to please everybody. As Ben says, you live in a city, you want it to be a fun place, and so agent of change is absolutely brilliant for that. I think the number of pubs that have been lost, we've brought in our own pub policy, but to have that guidance from the Mayor, to have that strategic support from various teams within this building is really, really powerful. How the two fit together, I think, is really crucial. So for me, it's a question of what we're offering to Londoners and what I'm offering to my residents in Waltham Forest. And people want a decent roof over their heads, but they also want to enjoy London for what it is because they're paying a premium for that roof over their head. So how do you make sure that people have got quality of life? For me, it has to be access to lots of stuff which is free. That's got to be, that's universalism, that's core to who I am politically, that's core to my borough, that's core to our belief in fellowship, and that's our heritage from William Morris. We have to have that type of offer. Through the Olympic year, we had a series of 6 events, cunningly called the Big Six, and that was really a test for us of how we were opening that up, and they were all free of charge. We've carried on that legacy with Walthamstow Garden Party and partnerships with Barbican and others, and it's how we provide that offer, how we make it a really exciting place to live, but then we embed that premise around culture into our plans for development as we go forward. So you can't just build flats. You have to think about how you integrate. You have to think about the social, economic infrastructure that you bring with that. Because whilst you're absolutely right, Shonagh, that socio-economic background isn't a protected characteristic, I believe it should be. So we act as if it were.
Thank you. And Justine and/or Ben, the creative enterprise zones, obviously quite a key part of the strategy. How will the Mayor decide how many to set up and where they'll be located? And is there a risk, and how are you going to manage that risk about the Mayor being the person who ends up deciding what culture is worth promoting and practising? How are you going to sort of mitigate that risk?
Yeah, shall I start?
I'll add to it.
Okay, so, creative enterprise zones we're very excited about. I think it is genuinely quite a groundbreaking policy. You know, but we've got to have a bold policy because the challenges are really significant. As I said before, we're set to lose 30% of artist workspace next year or so. And we know this kind of cycle of creatives, shock troops moving into areas, slightly unloved, lower priced areas, raising land values, building the character, etc. And then as the land values rise, they end up getting moved out. So this programme is all about the creative community putting down roots, because what we want is, as areas grow, we want that balance maintained. You know, we want good growth, you know, we want character as well as, you know, kind of rapid development. So creative enterprise owns about all of those things. And what we decided to do was, because it's a brand new idea, we decided to do a kind of test and do some research programmes to start it. So last week we announced 10 development grants of £50,000 each to 11 boroughs. It's 11 boroughs because Tower Hamlets and Hackney did a joint bid. So Barking and Dagenham, Bexley, Camden, Croydon, Harrow, Hounslow, Lambeth, Lewisham, Southwark as well. They all got these development grants, and the idea is that they will then work up in their borough what a creative enterprise zone might look like. So they'll of course be bespoke, so it's everything from kind of Hatton Garden, how can we protect Hatton Garden, through to Hackney Wick Studios, through to Harrow and Hounslow. So it's about, so what they'll all be doing is working out what is their story as a creative hub in their boroughs, but there will also be some kind of core themes and pillars within each programme. So one will be the establishment and securing of new creative workspace in perpetuity. That will be a kind of red line. One will be about the development of new creative jobs. And the third will be opening up opportunities for young people. So what we want is to create a kind of porous zone where local people kind of know this stuff's happening in their borough, and they kind of, you know, they can kind of access it, they feel it's for them, the jobs are there. You know, so it's kind of a porous programme rather than a kind of parachuted programme. And it's all about retaining creative communities, allowing them to put down roots and securing that space.
I mean, the board has spent a significant amount of time looking at this issue. I mean, as Justine says, it's a major policy of the moment. What we're interested in is the long term, because I think these, not just development grants, but the actual creative enterprise zones will be kind of planting and nurturing a cluster of activity in a particular part of the city. What we're interested in is building some momentum that lasts way beyond our support and involvement. It's placemaking. It's about creating a new like-minded group of people and a new identity for that particular area. You know, I come back to that point about reputation. We were able to establish these communities in areas of the city. It acts as a magnet for others to come and grow. And we've seen this happen in an evolving way in places like Shoreditch in the past. Now, of course, that's changed significantly when you've got Versace moving into Shoreditch. But originally, that creative community created the identity for that area. And that's what we'd like to achieve in other parts of the city.
And Sharon, I wonder whether you could comment on how important a creative enterprise zone might be for a museum, or would museums sit outside that kind of structure?
No, it's actually really interesting. We are in the City of London, and our new site will be located in West Smithfield, in an area which the city is developing with partnerships as Culture Mile. The interesting thing that happened recently was that the city, through Culture Mile, applied for a creative enterprise zone grant to look at how Culture Mile can evolve in this way. Now, it wasn't successful. We've heard about all the successful boroughs, but the mere process of that has created a commitment from Culture Mile to carry on with the proposal to look at creative enterprise zone around Culture Mile. So that's just kind of an interesting aside. In the mere fact of running a competition gets people going and fosters kind of attention around particular things. For the museum being part of, we consider ourselves, amongst many things, to be part of the creative industries. And so we know that being part of an environment which is fostering fusion skills, which is bringing in different, a wide range of players in the field of creativity is really important. And just thinking about a museum itself, we are a business and education, an educational institution. We will be in the process of regenerating an area. We have opportunities in terms of delivery of the museum. The creative skills and talent that we need to draw on are as profound as the film industry. And so it's really in our interest to be in an area that kind of brings that talent to the fore, and to recognise the role that we play in that as well.
Thank you. And final set of questions. It's one question, but it's sort of split into two, really. Final question from me is on the Creative Land Trust. Now, Justine, you mentioned about sort of having space in perpetuity. Is that basically the underlying idea of the Creative Land Trust?
Yeah, it is. And it's an idea that we learnt about through the World Cities Culture Forum from San Francisco. So San Francisco has got very similar challenges to us. So land is really, really expensive over there, and they have got, they're losing quite a lot of creative infrastructure too. And so their mayor's office kind of seed funded a startup to look at how it could facilitate the access to finance for, you know, small venues and organisations. Because what they found and what we found is that because we work in because it's such a buoyant market in London, the property market is so buoyant. Often, if you are a workspace provider, you're providing creative workspace or a venue, even if you can find a venue, which in the first place is very difficult to find the space or the studio space, then you need to rapidly assemble the finance. So, you know, you might need a bit of a mortgage, you need some philanthropic, you need a grant from perhaps the Arts Council or Heritage. So all of that takes a long time. And the property market hasn't, you know, you have to be there with your offer straight away. So the Creative Land Trust is really about bridging that gap and looking at kind of social investment, the mayor's investment. We've got lots of interest, the Arts Council are very interested in coming in as well, to look at how we might create this new model really. And the idea is that the money would flow back into the trust over time, but it really is a kind of intervention to allow this creative space to be secured in the city in what is a very buoyant marketplace.
And what level of engagement have you had with the public and private sectors in sort of developing the concept?
Yeah, there's been a whole feasibility study into it. Lots of different models have been tested. We're in dialogue with our friends in San Francisco. Their version is called the CAST, which is the Community Action Stabilisation Trust. And yeah, through that process there's been lots of engagement. In fact, particularly around the kind of finance modelling, we've taken advice from you know, financial analysts in the business world to look at, you know, what kind of investment models will work.
Thank you. And when will we see the first Creative Land Trust sort of development?
Yeah, we're in the process now of getting the charity registration, so that takes a while, but as soon as that's done we can be up and running.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Sean, did you want to come in?
I think you partially answered my question. This is to Ben, Justine, and maybe even the council want to chip in here, because when you talk about setting up artists, you know, places for them to work, etc., and you look at the history of London, we have lots of that. But there were places like Chelsea and Shoreditch now, which are well beyond the cost of anybody. Do you have a model for protecting that, whatever it is, that enclave from property price uplift? Is there something that you can do to say, okay, we set this area up and we're going to try and keep it for many a year so it doesn't just become the new Chelsea or the new Shoreditch?
Yeah, what we can't do is change the kind of the system, the economic system we work in. But what the two of the programmes we just talked about actually are particularly addressing that issue. and it's all about artists being able to put down roots in areas that they've helped to kind of develop and play a role in. And the first one is the creative enterprise zones, so establishing zones where people can put down roots. There's in perpetuity, long-term creative workspace, and then the Creative Land Trust, again, will be another vehicle to secure long-term creative space. And of course, within the London Plan, the third overarching policy tool really embeds creative workspace in the London Plan for the first time. So, you know, where there are big developments happening and there's a lot of creative workspace, we are signalling in the London Plan that there needs to be no net loss, that we don't want to see a loss of creative workspace as big developments happen.
So is there an idea that the Land Trust would be almost a sort of financial muscle and would be able to work with the London Plan to...
Yeah, I mean, it's access to finance, really. Yeah, it's a kind of bridging loan, or, you know, it can buy property itself. But it's all for the kind of charitable goal, really. It will just be set up as a charity, it won't be for profit.
I think each of these, and I hope each of these, were very distinctive from each other because they are formed for a consortium of local partners, public and private. So we would hope that the local authority would support this, but we'd hope that local developers might participate in the creative enterprise zones as well. So we want to embed the zone with a consortium of partners who have a vested interest in its long-term success. You know, it is about longevity. They may not all succeed in the longer run, but we hope they all will. And, you know, as Sharon says, each and every one of them is distinct and different from each other. And that distinctiveness, I think, will be a very powerful tool in encouraging more and more people to participate in them.
And just one tiny little addition. What can you do to cycle artists through? Because you talk about putting down roots. You know, a group of people arrive, put down roots. How do the young come through? How can they be part of that conversation?
It's worth adding that it's not just artists. You know, it's incubator creative businesses as well. Yeah. And that mix is very, very important part of it.
If I could just add, we've got a really strong example in Waltham Stowe, Black Horse Workshops. And we've been very grateful for GLA funding to help grow and maintain that project, and it's just celebrated its 4th birthday and has a great deal of sustainability in it. But it builds on a point that Justine referred to earlier, so it's not just about the people who you think of as artists, it is the people who are the makers and creators as well. And there's a huge chunk of our economy that is powered by those people. And I think there's really practical stuff that we can do as local authorities. So a developer who was bringing forward a site in Leighton, which isn't traditionally a part of our borough, that's been as focused on creativity and making. We talked to the developer really early doors and said, we need artist space, so that's what we want your ground floor to be. And he's got no experience of doing that, or people who've got experience of doing that, but we know how to build those connections. And then in the planning permission, we can enshrine the status of that ground floor space. But I think permitted development has created a great deal of risk, and spaces have been lost and will continue to be lost unless we can put a stop to that. And I think the tremendous risk across London and across the country, frankly, of permitted development is really risky. And it's the two sides of it. Some of the properties that have been turned into residential are awful places to live, but would be great spaces to work in. But you shouldn't be living in those spaces. So anything that we can do to sort of pull back control on that for local councils like mine would be fantastic.
And if I may, just to add to that, the aspects of skills development and how community access is brought in are absolutely crucial to the creative enterprise zone. So as well as the kind of space itself and the policy, or the rates treatment that might go along that, we are expecting of creative enterprise zones that they have a skills and development plan, that they are engaging with the community, and the applications will be assessed on that basis. And there is European Social Fund money going into the skills aspects of those grants too.
Thank you very much. Now, our next sort of bit of questioning is about...
I just wanted to come in on this section. Sorry, just quickly. I think obviously the protection and sort of permanent space is incredibly important. But of course, I know, Justine, you've also wanted to support meanwhile uses and things like that. In the London Plan, there's a section on meanwhile use and the housing section in terms of using land for pop-up housing. I can't recall if there's anything sort of in the culture and heritage section. Is there anything in the strategy or in the plan which, in terms of policies, which are going to encourage meanwhile use, making use of empty buildings and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, we fully support Meanwhile as part of the mix. I think the thing that we're trying to do, I think sometimes we've had a lot of conversations in the past where, you know, developers and councils have said, oh, well, we're giving Meanwhile space to artists, or we've got, you know, this is our solution. Of course, Meanwhile space is short-term space. So while it's a really important part of the mix of the ecosystem, we've got to have these longer-term, in perpetuity things going on alongside it. So I would say yes.
I'm not suggesting it's an alternative.
Yeah. I'm just saying sometimes we find that people see it as an alternative, but that's why we kind of caveat it. We say, you know, Meanwhile space is an important part of the mix, but the ultimate goal is the long-term security of cultural infrastructure. Thanks.
So yes, creative Londoners. Some of this got touched on earlier in the meeting, but first of all, how do you, Justine, plan to improve the diversity in the creative workforce?
Yeah, we have touched on this, but we can touch on it again. Lots of different ways.
Sorry, Chair. So I say, apologising to the Chair for going into this as my question.
Don't worry, Tom. Or maybe Justine, I can take you to something much more specific, which is on policy 13.2, you talk about supporting creative businesses to take up the good work standard. And I'm just wondering if you could just expand a bit more on what that support actually looks like in practice.
Yeah, maybe Shonagh can. She's very
Would Shonagh like to do that?
Absolutely. So we've been working with the economic team in the development and asking questions around the good work standard as we go. I think particularly we were very interested in the status it would take around internships, because for our industry that is a huge barrier to many people. So for us, it will be about, through our programmes, us promoting to cultural organisations that the good work standard will exist. We would really like to say great take-up from the creative industries and from cultural organisations around the good work standard. It's going to offer a kind of whole range of ways of marking yourself out as an employer of choice, both through the development you offer for your staff teams, the recruitment practices that you undertake. It will be a great flag bearer, I think, as an employer, and we all know it is a competitive industry out there. So we're really excited to work with creative industries on their take-up of that policy.
And, I mean, because I can't find there's some very carefully worded, there are still pockets of bad practice amongst creative employers across the capital. Obviously, in the kind of slightly hand-to-mouth way that some creative projects get going, you can understand why there is a culture of paying people what you can afford to pay to try and make a project that feels inspiring and that you really want to make it happen. That feels like it's the bit where it's going to be really challenging to get that good work standard embedded. Have you thought about how you can, get to that last bit where good work practice, good employment practice is kind of still absent?
I think there's been a huge change in how the industries are approaching this area, certainly in the kind of last decade that I've worked particularly around diversity and employment. So I do feel really positive that we have moved down the line and that we can take another step. But I think you are absolutely right. I completely agree around how challenging that is, and that's a really acute understanding of what it is like to be a small business, particularly an emerging business, which are hugely important to support. I still think, though, that within small businesses, some of them are, because of the human scale of it, some of them are some of the best at adhering to and being models of best practice in that area. And I think one of the great things that we can do is point to that best practice. We can provide visibility for those organisations and individuals who are role models in that area. I think if you look at things like the way that Film London have developed their equal access approach, which I'm very delighted that we are funding and involved in, they have been working with they've been working with different community groups to raise awareness of the paid opportunities, internships and training opportunities that they offer, and they've had great success in getting individuals from lots of different backgrounds through that programme and through that into ongoing work in the industry. So I think the more that we can point to ways that it works and how to make that manageable, the more chance we'll have of rolling that out, even in challenging areas.
Thank you. And then just thinking about sort of mass participation, we've heard about Hull and volunteering, and I wonder, Jenny, if you might have anything to share on this. Is there any, is there evidence or experience that shows how increasing participation, perhaps possibly via volunteering, can be a stepping stone to getting a job within creative industries?
Yes. I think Hull probably does have those statistics. I'd say that the evidence that we have in terms of anecdotal evidence around our partners, and again, as Justine and others have referred to, this is very much a partnership sector, so we work in partnership with many, many others. But being involved in one thing leads to another, and the evidence of the volunteers, for instance, in the We're Here Because We're Here, those 2,000 volunteers then pursuing roles within the arts is quite good. That's a very small number, so you can't kind of necessarily extrapolate from one thing to the other, but I would say that it gives a huge confidence, as well as a network of others, and as well as experience that you can add to your CV. And a lot of organisations that we partner with are very good at making sure that they follow through with those volunteers. So our programme with the volunteers over We're Here Because We're Here has extended for the year and a half since then. I'd say, looking forward to another participatory project that we're doing, which involves very many more. On the 10th of June this year, Processions will celebrate 100 years of Votes for Women. We're inviting women from all over the country to participate, both in banner making workshops now with 100 artists working with 100 community groups, but also with wider partnerships with women's institutes, with Girl Guiding, with This Girl Can. And those processions will take place in the 4 political capitals, so London will be an absolutely leading part of that. The participation, both in terms of voluntary sector, but also in terms of workplace, so corporate partners can involve all the women who work for, whether it's Network Rail or a bank in the city or Battersea Arts Centre or whoever it is. And all of those things are part of building and encouraging a confidence in the ability, but also in knowing more about how the arts and cultural sector works. So although they don't point to particular pathways, they are part of the kind of pipeline of talent and making sure that we're involving more and more people into getting into the creative industries in lots of different ways.
Do you find that the people who are participating in these mass participation projects, and we've heard about, was it 92% of people in the creative industries come from advantaged backgrounds, thank you. Do you think that this kind of participatory event is moving beyond that 92%?
Certainly the participatory activities are moving beyond that 92%. I think the big challenge is getting those people who have participated and enjoyed participating to the next stage. So our stats, we know that nearly 80% of those people are more interested in finding out more about their own heritage, finding out about their family and community links with the First World War. That's what our programme is doing. The next stage is getting people to consider careers in the cultural sector, and I think that the cultural plan goes a long way to doing that and will be copied, I think, by many other cities. It is a huge, huge task, and all the things that you have mentioned about unpaid internships, about the cost of courses in cultural activities as well as in other higher education, are all barriers to entry. The fact that it's quite a small sector and slightly haphazard in terms of career structure, all of those things are unhelpful. And so having a plan that really helps to identify those pathways and identify areas of good practice is going to be hugely helpful.
Are you saying that what you see in the culture strategy makes it look as if those pathways...
I think so. I think they've identified a number of different pathways, and through the partnership programme that the Mayor's team has, I think that will really help. It is a very, very big task, and it will take time.
Thank you. Justine, slightly shifting topic, but the Business Advisory Board, which is being established under Policy 16, which is to support creative production and export through a range of activities and funding. What exactly is that going to be doing?
I'm just looking at 16.
Sorry. Let's find the page.
Yeah. Yes, so this is the Creative Industries Investment Programme. So, one of the ingredients, I think, in London really securing its space, its place as a creative industries capital has been sustained investment, actually, from City Hall. London Fashion Week is funded through that programme, and that does a number of things. So it makes sure we have the right buyers and influencers here at London Fashion Week. Over the course of the year, £100 million worth of business is done. It focuses on apprenticeships through British Fashion Council. Film London are funded to promote London as a filmmaking capital. Before they existed, kind of 10 or 12 years ago, London had quite a bad reputation as quite a difficult place to make movies. There were different fee structures in the different boroughs. No one knew how to close a road. There's some quite kind of we had quite a bad reputation. Anyway, concerted effort by establishing this new Film London agency over a decade ago has really shifted the dial. Now, as I said before, we're the third biggest filmmaking capital outside of the States, and growth, I think, is 30% in filmmaking, 40 crews every day. And we're now at the point where we've run out of space. So, all of their work is about bringing the investment in, and then last week announcing the new Dagenham East Film Centre will boost the capacity that we need for major blockbusters. So that's the film side of it. Fashion Week. London Fashion Week Men's is also funded through that programme. So we've really established ourselves as a men's fashion capital. We're kind of giving Milan a run for its money, because historically it's been Milan, to the point at which the mayor of Milan told his brands not to come to London. So we're doing really well on that. And it's also about supporting new talent, actually, in those schemes.
So the board is... How is it doing all of that? Is this like the...
This is, so under Policy 16, Mayor will support creative production and export through a range of activities and funding. So the things I'm describing are the core work programmes and funding streams that will deliver that objective. Then London and Partners have got their own business engagement programme, and they include creative industries in that. And then there's the Business Advisory Board here, overseen by Rajesh, Deputy Mayor for Business. And they've got creative industry representation there. So, there's a range of different kind of advisory bodies, plus this kind of core investment programme sitting in the middle of it, and that's the programme that's delivering the kind of concrete, measurable returns.
Thank you. I'm now going to bring Sean in, who is going to be asking you about London as a world city.
The cultural strategy states that Brexit is a risk factor on the impact of London's reputation. Can you outline for us what you think those risks are?
Yeah, we are concerned for a number of reasons. The EU is the biggest market for the creative industries. Over 40% of creative industry trade in London happens with the EU bloc. A third of creative jobs in London are filled by international talent. Over 20% of creative businesses say that if there's a no-deal outcome, they're going to consider moving their businesses abroad. The Mayor commissioned some independent research. That
Sorry, are you saying that the businesses in our cultural sector are saying that?
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah,
You said what percentage, sorry?
21% of creative businesses say a no-deal outcome would make them consider moving part or all of their businesses abroad, came through the research. The other risk is around funding. Creative Europe has funded a lot of cultural projects. In the last couple of years, 283 UK cultural and creative organisations have been funded through EU funding. EU funding plays a really important role in the distribution of film. 115 UK films have been funded across European territories in the last kind of 4 or 5 years. And the other thing is talent, really, as well as the access to market and funding. It's the talent pool. We're really reliant on this great flow of talent between Europe and European cities and London. Great museum directors of fashion brands, models. There's lots of flow between talent, and we want that flow to continue. So there are some serious worries.
Can I add a couple of things to that? Justine's just alluded to it. You don't have to retrain if you're creative, go and work in another city. It's not like being a lawyer or another discipline. So it's borderless. People are very mobile as creative people. London has enjoyed, and I think we can say we have the biggest creative economy out of any global city at the moment. So we're at a high, and other cities are very envious about our dominance and our scale. We need to protect this. One of the ways we need to protect this is to have continual access to the best talent. It's talent at all levels, but we certainly need the people at the top of their game to choose to live and work in our city, because they act as a magnet to many others who are drawn to, and we talked about clusters earlier, we talked about reputation earlier, they're drawn to a place where they're full of like-minded people and there's a kind of scale of opportunity. The fear is that the pendulum could swing very quickly the other way. We're seeing already proactive schemes from other European cities to try and draw UK and London talent to their cities. Lisbon is pushing hard on the digital sector and offering a lot of financial incentives. We all hear about Berlin providing free space to artists and others, and it's relatively cheap to set up and live in Berlin. How do we ensure that London stays at the top? How do we ensure that London is as dominant as it's been in recent years? And all of the work that we've been trying to do is about maintaining that position.
That leads me nicely on to my next question. Are there any opportunities that London might better exploit once we've left the EU? Because some of what you're saying is can't be changed. We are the only mega city in Europe by quite some way. People come to London anyway. Our tourist numbers haven't gone down with all this Brexit talk. So is there other things that we could be leveraging into the future to boost London's standing in business terms, creative terms, any terms you like?
Well, one of the major programmes is the London is Open campaign, and that was born off the back of Brexit, really, and what people were telling us about, the message we needed to send from London. And London is Open has been a really successful campaign, continues to run, and it's all about telling the world that London is open for business, for investment, for visitors, for creative talent, for ideas. And it's had a number of different iterations. The first iteration, we commissioned a lot of artists. It was a very public-facing campaign, all over the tube system, fantastic. And throughout, we've had the theatre industry backers, the music industry, design. So there's a lot of appetite to send a really positive message that despite us leaving the EU, London remains open, remains a world-class capital.
When you say London's Open has been successful, under what measure, what KPI, what's coming back to let you know it's been successful?
Well, I think you know, if you look at the kind of polling, it's you know, it's up there in the consciousness of Londoners. You know, wherever I go, people talk to me about it. You know, we're approached all the time about people industry getting involved in it. So I think it has, you know, it's continued to get traction. I don't have the KPIs here with me, but if you want them,
I'd like to see them.
Yeah, for sure.
Because my other question would be, is the London Open campaign for us in London or for everybody else? You know,
it's for
who's it directed at?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of it as a campaign, really. It speaks to lots of different audiences, you know, and Londoners love it as much as, you know, it works in international markets. I mean, one of the things about Londoners is, of course, you know, we're the most international city on the planet, 300 languages spoken here every day, lots of European citizens here. And one of the really important things it's done is reassured Londoners, for EU citizens in London, that we want them to stay and they're really important to the success of our city.
I think Londoners have been very good with that and about that. A question I'd like to ask, if we have a worry around talent, is this also an opportunity to order undeveloped talent in London? Some of the work you've spoken about before, about including other people who don't see the arts as something they can even be involved in, is this an opportunity to be involved in employment? I work with a lot of young people who I think would be excited in working in creative industries if someone was to approach them.
Definitely.
So is this opportunity for us to use some British-based workers to fill some of this worry that you have around employees?
Yeah, I mean, all the programmes we've talked about are all about, lots of them are about opening the doors to Londoners who don't normally get access to creative jobs. So yeah, I think the two things work in tandem. I don't think the doors are open to everyone, really. So I think, you know, we've got over 30,000 creative art and creative design students graduating every year in London. So there's a big talent pool, but, you know, we want to keep it open.
But a significant number of them are from the EU. We've benefited from the best of European talent coming to be educated here and then staying and establishing themselves in our city. Post-Brexit, there is a fear that many of those won't come, partly because of the cost and partly because of the employment opportunities going forward. In my sector, in design, most of the stars of the sector don't have British passports, but they choose to live and work in our city. That's so important that flow continues to come in.
I agree with that, and Brexit will or won't affect that. It might, something else might happen. When you say cost, are you suggesting that Brexit will be will directly change the cost of being here?
Well, your status as an international student, will be much more expensive. At the moment, you pay the same as what a UK-based student would pay to come here and do a HE degree. Post-Brexit, you'll pay the same as an international student, which is 3 times as high. So if you're a German student, for example, you can be educated for 3 in Berlin, but to come here would cost you perhaps £25,000 per year. You need to be very motivated
and
rich to be able to come and educate yourself here.
But does that uplift in cost for some students? And I'd argue no matter what happens, London will be significantly more exciting than Berlin as a place to be. Does that provide more money to our university sector, to your sector, because people are paying more to be trained by you?
Provides more places potentially, but you know the other issue is of course the talent. We've touched on this earlier. If people making conscious choices within secondary education to go into the creative sector, you know that's still a big task for universities and indeed education, where creative subjects have been marginalised at the moment. You know we need to find ways to broaden the domestic talent coming through the system.
You look like you wanted to come in.
If I may, because I think it's such a shame that it has to turn into some sort of negotiated choice, because it shouldn't have to be. I think the strength that has been very well articulated by these guys who are far more expert than me, but I think this is part of. I think of Brexit as not just an economic risk, but as a human and personal tragedy. It is about having the very best people here from around the world in order that Londoners and people across this country can benefit from those expertise, and that will have a transformative effect. But those conversations, those cross-cultural conversations, are what make me very proud to be here and to be a Londoner. And anything that jeopardises that We have to use every tool at our disposal and every fibre of our beings to make sure that that doesn't create division, and that we continue to redouble our efforts to bring communities together, because I saw the community devastation. You know, members of staff who work for the council from other parts of Europe who wept the day after the referendum result. The human cost, the human impact of Brexit cannot be underestimated. We have to do everything that we can to minimise that risk.
Where I might agree, but Londoners didn't vote that way, did they? And I don't think anybody on my road comes from this country originally. And our community cohesion it's funded a different conversation. We've spoken about our community much more than we would have done because of Brexit, and we've come to whatever conclusions we have. I'm quite happy with our local conclusion, but I wonder, I don't know if it will stop the conversation or if it just changes it. I just wonder. But Chair.
Thank you. Can I just bring in Sharon? I wonder if you could comment on the risks and opportunities from the decision to leave the EU in terms of a big cultural institution in London.
There are a number. 25% of my employees at the Museum of London, we've got 250 people, from outside of the UK. So again, that kind of real talent pool, but also, as we said, you know, the personal impact. So this kind of that playing out. For us, we're embarked on a big fundraising campaign to raise £70 million towards our project. That's a large target. We need to make sure that philanthropists, investors, still see the worth of investing in London and cultural institutions in London. Many philanthropists are international, so that's really important. Of course, then the economy is important for our fundraising. There is also, you know, going back to the values, and I really firmly believe that London's position in the world is reliant on us always promoting the values that have almost always pertained from being a diverse city right from the beginning, absolutely right from the beginning, from AD 52. The Romans who invaded Britain were not all Italians. They came from all parts of the Roman Empire, and from North Africa right across the Roman Empire. So Londinium was a very diverse place, and it has been ever thus. So the kind of values around that are embedded in London, embodied almost in London is Open, is something that is an opportunity for our museum, as the Museum of London, to espouse and to be very strongly to put into the DNA of the museum. It's there already, but it's a kind of more poignant. A Museum of London, though, I believe there's never been a more urgent time for the Museum of London to talk about these values, to talk about who we are, to bring communities into our museum. So it's the need for the museum. There's kind of worries about it from talent, funding, but as I said, the need for the Museum of London, I think, has never been stronger.
Thank you. That probably brings us pretty much to the end of our discussion. I just wondered, does anyone have anything that they're burning to say that they haven't had, that hasn't come out through the questioning, that they think is important that we take note of as we respond as a committee to this strategy, or is everyone? Oh, Jenny.
I would say as a UK-wide programme, our programme and pretty well all other UK-wide programmes depends a great deal on the vibrancy of the cultural sector in London and the leadership that London arts organisations and community organisations, heritage organisations and museums play within a UK-wide sector. So it is incredibly important and a huge relief to hear the conversation today and be part of it, and the scrutiny and dedication on all sides of this lovely round table about how important the cultural sector and its growth and development is in London. So I'm hugely relieved to hear all of this. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. That does completely bring us to the end of our main discussion item on the draft culture strategy for London. Can I thank all of you for your contributions, and can I finally ask the committee to note the report and the discussion with our invited guests and delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with the party group lead members to agree the committee's formal response to the draft culture strategy.
Agreed.
Be a bit of work during purdah, everyone. The full recommendation is as follows. The committee is recommended to note the report as background to the discussion on the Mayor's draft economic development strategy for London with invited expert guests, and delegate authority to the chair in consultation with the party group lead members to agree the committee's formal response to the draft culture strategy. And finally, can I ask the committee to note its report, Rewrite the Night, the Future of London's Nighttime Economy? Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the updated work programme for the 2017-18 Assembly year as set out in paragraphs 4.2 to 4.14 of the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. And to note the initial priority topics for the work programmes for the 2018-19 Assembly year as set out in the paragraph 4.15 of the report?
Agreed.
Delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree a provisional work programme for the first part of 2018-19, which will be subject to formal agreement by the committee at its first meeting of the new Assembly year. Arrange for any site visits, informal meetings or engagement activities before the committee's next formal meeting, and agree the topic, terms of reference and scope for the committee's first provisional meeting of the 2018-19 Assembly year.
Agreed.
The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 23rd of May 2018 at 2 o'clock, subject to agreement at the Assembly's annual meeting. And there is no urgent business, and so that concludes the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.